What about advertising your rental property? You want to make sure in the ad, obviously, that you comply with fair housing and that you're not saying things like family area or perfect area for singles or something like that, right?
Right. You don't even want to say things like near the Catholic Church.
Good point.
That may in fact be true, but what you're doing is sending, perhaps, a subtle message that you want people of the Catholic religion and not others to apply. Now, that would be a conclusion that would maybe be reasonable or not. The problem is that if you say that and someone decides to challenge you on it, you may ultimately win, but you will have spent a lot of time and trouble fighting and defending yourself. So you want to avoid even getting entangled in any kind of a claim.
Very good point. What else about advertising the property besides fair housing laws?
Well, you want to make sure from a practical point of view that you give enough information to whoever's reading the ad that they will self-select and not bother you.
Right.
I mean, it's a delicate balance to reach the market that you really want to rent to and not exclude people whom you might ultimately want, and at the same time make sure that you don't get deluged with people who aren't suitable and who just take up your time.
So how do you do that? Yeah.
Well, you want to certainly give the rent. You want to explain what the amenities are, if any. You want to make sure that if your rental is for example, in an area that has great shops and restaurants, that you mention that. You want to make sure that if the town has an outstanding school system, you mention that. You'd want to make sure, for example, that if you are near a major employer, you'd want to highlight your proximity to that employer, and if that employer has a housing office in which they help their newly arrived employees find housing, you'd probably want to work with them, and the same would go for a university.
So you want to self-select because you get a lot of calls in these rental ads, so it's good if they self-select and you tell a lot about the property in the ad, of course, keeping in mind fair housing laws and making sure you don't step over those.
And you want to make sure that you state the deposit, which can be quite a bit of money these days. Most states limit the amount of deposit, but it's not uncommon to ask for twice the monthly rent, and in many states that's perfectly legal. When you add that to the first month's rent, we're looking at several $1,000s in many cases. And if you require a deposit of that size, you should say so that people who don't have it aren't going to call you and take up your time.
My understanding, at least with California, I believe, although I haven't dealt with this directly in years, is that an unfurnished property, you can have the first month's rent plus 2 months is the highest allowable security deposit. And then if it's furnished, I believe although I've never rented a furnished property, it's 3 months rent, right, as the security?
That's correct. And if by chance your tenant has a waterbed, it's hard to believe that too many people still have them these days, but you can add another half month's rent to the deposit in either furnished or unfurnished.
That's interesting. Can you do it with a fish tank or anything like that?
No.
Okay, just a waterbed.
Right.
And what about in other states? Do those vary a lot?
Yes, they do. Some states don't set a limit at all, and when that happens, the market will limit what you can ask for. If you ask for much more than a couple months' rent, you just aren't going to get people.